560 of you. 560 people asked the exact same question after our Plato video, how do we break the cycle? You weren't asking an academic question. You were expressing something deeper, a soul-level recognition that we're trapped in something ancient, something that feels completely inescapable. Though, what if the very fact that you're asking contains its own answer? What if the cycle that's trapped humanity for millennia has a backdoor, and you're already holding the key? 2,400 years ago, Plato diagnosed humanity's political disease with surgical precision. He mapped the decay from wisdom to tyranny, presenting it as an iron law of nature. Today, we watch these exact patterns play out in real time, and millions are asking, can we escape? The answer is yes. But to understand it, we need to see what Plato couldn't see from his position in history. Rudolf Steiner's philosophy of freedom reveals why consciousness itself holds the power to break cycles that have seemed unbreakable for millennia. Let me show you exactly what we're up against. In Republic Book 8, Plato maps political decay like a scientist mapping a disease. He identifies 5 stages that deteriorate into each other with clockwork precision, each containing the seeds of its own destruction. Aristocracy comes first, rule by wisdom. Philosopher kings who perceive eternal truths organize society according to divine principles. These leaders have transcended personal desire. They see reality's deeper patterns and govern from genuine understanding rather than mere opinion. But even in this ideal state, Plato plants the seed of doom. He describes the nuptial number, a mathematical error in breeding that gradually produces inferior guardians. These flawed leaders slowly lose sight of the eternal good. They retain the forms of wisdom, but not its living substance. As wisdom fades, these deteriorated guardians become warriors seeking honor instead of truth. Democracy emerges. Think ancient Sparta. Courage replaces contemplation. Military virtue becomes the highest value. Honor becomes the new currency of power, and competition drives everything. But warriors harbor a secret weakness. They accumulate wealth. Behind noble facades, they hoard gold. Gradually, inevitably, money becomes more important than honor. Oligarchy follows, rule by the wealthy few. Society splits into 2 cities, one of the rich, one of the poor, occupying the same physical space but living in completely different worlds. The oligarchs rule through property qualifications. Merit gets measured purely in currency. The gap widens until revolution erupts. The poor, driven by hunger and rage, overthrow their masters. They declare everyone equal, every opinion valid, every lifestyle legitimate. Democracy arrives with its intoxicating promise of absolute freedom. No more hierarchies, no more authority. Every desire carries equal weight. The son challenges the father, the student corrects the teacher, the criminal demands the same voice as the judge. But Plato saw what we're experiencing today. Excess freedom creates chaos. When every choice is equally valid, choice itself becomes impossible. People drown in infinite possibility. They desperately seek someone, anyone, to restore order and meaning. Enter the strongman. The tyrant promises to fix everything, to make decisions simple again, to restore meaning through force. But the tyrant himself is enslaved to base desires, paranoid fears, and an insatiable appetite for control. He rules through fear because he lives in constant fear. Tyranny represents maximum injustice, the complete inversion of natural order. Eventually, through catastrophe or conquest, society collapses entirely and the cycle begins again. Plato presents this pattern as cosmic law, as certain and inevitable as planetary movement. No escape, only eternal repetition. Or so it seemed. Those 560 questioners intuited something Plato missed. The cycle only appears inevitable because we're viewing it from inside an invisible prison. This prison has 3 bars, each forged from assumptions so fundamental that Plato, despite his genius, never questioned them. First bar, static forms. Plato believed in eternal, unchanging ideas existing in a transcendent realm, perfect circles, perfect justice, perfect beauty. The physical world could only produce imperfect copies of these eternal forms. No genuine novelty was possible, just endless rearrangements of eternal patterns. Imagine being told that every song that could ever exist was already written in heaven, and earthly musicians could only produce increasingly degraded covers. That's the prison of static forms. Creativity becomes impossible because everything real already exists in perfect, unchangeable form. Second bar, cyclical time. Ancient Greeks conceived time as circular. Everything that happens has happened before and will happen again. History doesn't progress. It repeats. No evolution, only eternal return. It's like being trapped in a cosmic replay where even your rebellions are predetermined repetitions. Your struggles against injustice, someone fought this exact battle 1,000 years ago. Your innovations, mere rediscoveries of ancient wisdom. This bar makes genuine transformation feel impossible. Third bar, collective over individual. Plato thought primarily of the polis, the collective state. Individuals existed to serve social harmony. A person was like a cell in the body politic, meaningful only in relation to the whole. Personal spiritual evolution wasn't just unimportant, it was almost inconceivable. This bar eliminates the very possibility that conscious individuals could transform collective patterns. You're forever subordinate to forces larger than yourself. These three assumptions create an airtight logical prison. If forms are eternally fixed, time moves in circles, and individuals are powerless against collective patterns, then political cycles become as inevitable as seasons changing. But what if we've been looking at reality through prison bars this entire time? What if consciousness itself evolves? What if time spirals upward rather than in circles? What if individuals can create genuinely new possibilities that have never before existed in the universe? The bars aren't made of iron, they're made of beliefs, and beliefs can be transformed. In 1894, Rudolf Steiner published The Philosophy of Freedom. Instead of merely philosophizing about breaking cycles, he provided the actual method. His exact words, "The human being is not determined by the past, but can determine himself through moral intuition arising from spiritual activity." This sounds abstract until you realize what he's actually describing. Every human being possesses a capacity that Plato couldn't fully conceive, the ability to generate genuinely new responses through what Steiner calls moral imagination. Here's how it works in practice. Think about the last time you faced a situation where no standard response felt right. Maybe a conflict where both fighting back and submitting felt equally wrong. You could feel the old patterns, programs inherited from family, culture, even our species, pushing you toward predictable reactions. Then something else arose, not from memory, not from emotion, not from conditioning, but from somewhere deeper. A third option you'd never considered before, a creative response that surprised even you as it emerged. That moment was moral imagination in action. You weren't selecting from a cosmic menu of pre-existing options that someone else had already invented. You were literally adding something genuinely new to the universe's inventory of possibilities. This represents a fundamental break from Plato's worldview. Plato believed that eternal forms in a transcendent realm create imperfect copies in our world, copies that inevitably decay into the cycles he described. Steiner discovered something revolutionary. Consciousness itself can generate entirely new forms through moral imagination. Instead of copying increasingly degraded patterns, we participate in creating evolutionary spirals that transcend repetitive circles. Every time you act from genuine moral imagination, not from tradition, not from emotion, not from social pressure, but from creative moral intuition birthed fresh in the moment, you create something that has never before existed. You become co-creator of reality itself, not just a copier of eternal patterns slowly degrading over time. Modern science validates what Steiner intuited over a century ago from multiple angles. Neuroscience reveals the brain's revolutionary capacity. Our neural networks literally rewire based on conscious practices. When you engage moral imagination, generating genuinely new responses rather than defaulting to programmed reactions, you're not just thinking differently. You're restructuring your brain, creating neural pathways that didn't exist moments before. Using advanced brain imaging, scientists can actually watch new connections form in real time when people engage creative problem solving that transcends habitual patterns. The brain physically transforms when consciousness operates from freedom rather than conditioning. This isn't metaphor. It's measurable biological change. Beyond individual brain changes, systems theory reveals something even more remarkable. Complex systems demonstrate sensitive dependence on initial conditions, what scientists call the butterfly effect. One individual operating from fundamentally different consciousness can catalyze transformation in entire communities, organizations, even civilizations. You don't need everyone awakening simultaneously. Research shows that just a small percentage of people operating from creative moral intuition can shift what biologist Rupert Sheldrake calls the morphogenetic field, the invisible template that shapes collective behavior patterns. Quantum physics adds perhaps the deepest layer. The observer effect demonstrates that consciousness doesn't just passively perceive reality, it actively participates in creating it. When you observe political patterns from the perspective of creative possibility rather than mechanical repetition, you literally change the probability distributions of what can manifest in the world. This convergence of spiritual insight and scientific discovery reveals something profound. The prison Plato described is absolutely real, but it's made of consciousness, not cosmic law. And what consciousness creates, consciousness can transform. The bars of the prison aren't iron, they're neural patterns, collective beliefs, and habitual ways of observing reality, all of which can be changed through the conscious application of moral imagination. So how does consciousness technology break each part of Plato's cycle? Instead of aristocracy with fixed philosopher kings knowing unchanging truth, we get leadership through evolving moral imagination. Leaders don't impose eternal forms, but facilitate emergence of new possibilities through collective wisdom. The philosopher becomes someone thinking living thoughts that evolve with circumstances, not memorizing dead concepts. Rather than democracy, where honor-seeking creates competition and conflict, we see recognition nurturing individual capacities. Honor transforms from ego gratification into honoring unique spiritual contribution each person brings. Competition becomes collaboration serving collective evolution. Replace oligarchy, where wealth concentration breeds revolution, with economic life serving spiritual and cultural development. Money becomes a tool for enabling human potential, rather than hoarding power. Ownership transforms into stewardship. The question changes from, how much can I accumulate, to, how can resources serve the highest good? Democracy's excessive freedom creating chaos becomes freedom paired with moral imagination, creating harmony. Instead of every desire being equal, we develop the capacity to evaluate and choose from spiritual insight. Freedom isn't licensed to do whatever, it's the ability to want what serves evolution. Tyranny becomes impossible when individuals self-determine through moral intuition. You cannot tyrannize someone acting from inner freedom. External force becomes unnecessary when internal freedom reigns. The tyrant has no purchase on sovereign beings. We're already seeing consciousness technology break cycles in real time, though mainstream analysis rarely recognizes the deeper pattern at work. The open source revolution. The software movement didn't break proprietary knowledge hoarding through traditional revolution, protests, legislation, or corporate takeovers. Instead, programmers created an entirely new paradigm from different consciousness. Nobody owns Linux. Everyone contributes. Value flows freely. The old model of scarcity and control didn't get defeated. It became irrelevant. They didn't fight the existing system. They built something new from fundamentally different assumptions about how knowledge works. Regenerative agriculture. Around the world, farmers are breaking industrial agriculture's destructive cycles, but not by returning to pre-industrial methods. They're creating unprecedented approaches that heal soil while feeding people more effectively than either traditional or industrial farming. They observed the pattern, recognized its unsustainability, then imagined something that had never existed before. Farming that gives back more than it takes. Economic innovation, alternative currencies, and exchange systems emerge daily. Communities worldwide create economic models based on abundance rather than scarcity, contribution rather than extraction. Local currencies, time banks, gift economies, these aren't attempts to reform the old monetary system. They're birthing entirely new economic realities from different consciousness about what money and value actually are. Governance evolution. Even in politics, we see experiments in participatory democracy, sociocracy, and collaborative decision-making models that transcend the traditional hierarchies Plato described. These aren't returns to tribal council decision-making, but evolutionary leaps into unprecedented forms of collective wisdom that honor both individual insight and group intelligence. Notice the pattern. Each example demonstrates that when consciousness shifts at a fundamental level, it doesn't rearrange old patterns or fight existing systems. It creates genuinely new possibilities that make the old cycles obsolete, not through force, but through creative transcendence. Understanding intellectually isn't enough. Cycles break only when we embody consciousness technology in actual situations. This week, identify one area where you feel trapped in recurring patterns. Personal patterns. Notice the same internal conflicts arising repeatedly. Maybe you always react defensively when criticized, or procrastinate when facing important decisions, or find yourself in similar relationship dynamics with different people. These repetitive responses reveal where you're operating from conditioning rather than creative freedom. Professional patterns. Observe systemic problems at work that seem to repeat regardless of personnel changes. Perhaps meetings that accomplish nothing, conflicts between departments that resurface monthly, or leadership decisions that create the same issues over and over. These organizational cycles mirror individual unconsciousness at collective scale. Political patterns. Recognize social issues that feel utterly intractable, the same debates rehashed for decades with no genuine resolution. Whether it's polarization, inequality, or environmental destruction, these cycles persist because we keep choosing from the same menu of predetermined responses. Once you've identified a pattern, here's the crucial shift. Instead of automatically choosing existing options, fight, flight, freeze, submit, or any other habitual response, pause and sit with this question. What response could I create that has never existed before? This isn't clever problem solving from existing knowledge. Don't force an answer from your analytical mind. Instead, allow genuine moral imagination to arise from that deeper place where creativity lives. You're not selecting from a cosmic menu of pre-existing solutions. You're becoming a co-creator of new possibilities. When a genuinely new response emerges, and you'll recognize it because it surprises even you, act immediately, even in some small way. Document what happens. You're literally creating new pathways in reality's fabric, weakening the pattern's grip while strengthening humanity's evolutionary capacity. Start small. You don't need to transform civilization overnight. Every act of moral imagination, however modest, contributes to breaking cycles that have trapped consciousness for millennia. We're talking about something far beyond politics. Plato's cycle reveals a deeper pattern that consciousness itself has been trapped in for millennia. The tendency to crystallize into rigid forms, then decay, then crystallize again. This same pattern manifests everywhere you look. Relationships that start fresh and alive gradually calcify into predictable roles, then either die or explode into conflict before starting over. Organizations that begin with innovative vision slowly bureaucratize into dead procedures, then collapse or get revolutionized. Even spiritual traditions, born from direct mystical insight, they crystallize into dogma, decay into empty ritual, then either disappear or get reformed by new mystics. But here's Steiner's revolutionary insight. Consciousness itself is evolving. We are literally not the same kind of beings who lived in ancient Athens. We've developed capacities that were barely embryonic in Plato's time, particularly the ability to observe our own thinking processes and consciously choose our responses, rather than react automatically. Think about it. You can watch yourself having a thought. You can notice yourself getting angry and choose a different response. You can observe patterns in your behavior and deliberately change them. This self-reflective consciousness that can step outside itself was what Steiner called humanity's greatest evolutionary achievement. The political cycles Plato described were humanity's childhood training wheels, necessary patterns that taught us about power, justice, and social organization. But now we're learning to balance on our own, creating genuine forward movement rather than endless repetition. The shift from cyclical time to evolutionary time changes everything. Instead of eternal return, we discover eternal becoming. Instead of copying increasingly degraded forms from some distant perfection, we participate as conscious creators of entirely new forms. Instead of individuals serving predetermined collective patterns, conscious individuals gain the power to transform those patterns from within. This is why your personal practice of moral imagination matters cosmically. You're not just solving personal problems, you're participating in consciousness evolution itself. 560 people asked, how do we break the cycle? Here's your answer. Develop moral imagination. Act from creative intuition, not mechanical reaction. Generate responses that have never existed before. Every time you do this, you become a crack in the cycle's foundation. Enough cracks, and the whole structure transforms. This isn't passive hope, waiting for someone else to fix things. This is active spiritual work that requires developing new capacities, practicing unfamiliar forms of thinking, and learning to act from freedom rather than conditioning. Cycles break when enough individuals realize a fundamental truth. We are not prisoners of historical necessity, but co-creators of evolutionary possibility. The shift happens when we stop asking, what's happening to us, and start asking, what wants to emerge through us. For deeper practices, we've created a free guide, Breaking Political Cycles, the practical manual, with 7 specific exercises from Steiner's work adapted for our current moment. Link in description below. But here's what matters most. Reading about freedom isn't freedom. Understanding cycles intellectually doesn't break them. Transformation happens only when you embody these principles in actual life, through real choices in this present moment. The age of cycles is ending. The age of conscious evolution has begun. It advances one act of moral imagination at a time, one free deed at a time, one awakening individual at a time. The question isn't whether humanity will break free from Plato's cycle. That's already happening. The question is whether you'll participate in this liberation or remain asleep to the creative power you carry. This choice, perhaps the first genuinely free choice in human history, is yours.